Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Clash in a Flash podcast. I'm your host Emerson,
Hey, it's me, your co-host Tuan.
and today we'll be speaking about champions that are picked in pro play, but why we think they shouldn't be picked in Clash. Just as a disclaimer before we start, these opinions are our own. We are not professional players, coaches, or analysts. We do not take fault if you end up losing all of your Clash games, sometimes like we do, and we just like League and we play Clash a lot. Yeah, so this topic was brought to me from Tuan, so I want, go ahead, Tuan.
So yeah, as Emerson mentioned earlier, we're going to be discussing why champions are highly contested in pro play, but we believe shouldn't be picked as much in Clash. This is generally because the champions that are picked in pro play generally either require very good macro sense and game knowledge, and or require a lot of mechanics. It requires a very high skill ceiling in order to effectively play the champion. One of the examples of that being TF. The reason why that TF is highly contested in pro play at the moment is because he provides very good global presence. With his ultimate, you're basically able to see everyone on an enemy team with the ability to also teleport to any location desiring. Although it is not infinite range, it is still pretty good range. So for example, if you were to use TF ulti in mid lane, you can generally make it to bot or top side with if you just scoot over a bit into whichever side you plan on TPing towards, then using an ulti afterwards. Another reason why that TF is very contested in pro play as well is because he is a champion that you can blind pick, at least in pro play. And reason that is because generally speaking, when a team drafts for TF, they don't necessarily want to play through mid lane. If anything, they want to be playing through their other lanes, whether that might be top, bot, or even jungle. And it's the whole idea that basically how TF would want to play his laning phase, he would just want to try to shove in the wave as quickly as possible. And then while the opposing mid laner would have to deal with the incoming minions that are about to crash to their own turret, that'll be the time when TF could make that proactive play and basically be able to either make picks and get the team ahead, or use a knowledge gained from the ultimate and try to rotate for a neutral objective where that might be Dragon or Rift Herald. And lastly, one other reason why TF is very contested in pro play too is because he has a very flexible playstyle where he can be played as a split pusher and or can also be played as a pseudo engage. Although it might be very risky to play TF that way, it can be done, especially if you run the Proto Belt rapid fire cannon to Zhonya's. Basically, from there, you have instant access to pick anyone off. Basically, after using TP, you'd probably Proto Belt uh, gold card key target, and if they ever try to turn onto you, you can Zhonya's. And then while they are busy trying to basically doggy pile over you, your team should be able to collapse over to the person that was gold carded, pretty much explode them. And then from there, you probably end up trading your life, but in exchange, you'll be trading it for a key player from the enemy team. And after that point, it should be a winning team fight for your side, if anything. So with that, I'll be going over the statistics of TF in pro play and also in solo queue. And just as a disclaimer, the stats I'll be providing from pool play are generally, or rather only, going to be from LCS and LEC. So if you're wondering how come we're not including LPL and LCK, it is because we don't generally watch those regions. So we'll be sticking to the stats from the regions of pro play that we do watch. So that being said, in pro play, TF has a 68% ban rate, and that's actually pretty significant because it basically signifies that this champion is a very highly contested pick. Teams generally don't want to be giving this away, and if they do plan on giving away, they generally have a very planned answer should the TF be picked very early on. But most of the time, because that part is not really viable at the moment, that's why teams just opt to ban it in the first place. But yeah, furthermore, it also has a 22% pick rate. So if you add the ban rate and the pick rate together, you're essentially getting a 90% TF in all of pro play drafts. So only in 10% of the games is where TF is actually not being banned or picked, which is pretty good for a champion that is, you know, being tested a lot. It means that the strengths are so good that like it's basically like what are you doing if you're not picking this champion, right? It's like it's either you have a very good answer to it, or your team generally doesn't want to play that type of play style. Hence, they try to opt out of it. And to also prove to that point as well, when TFs are being picked, only 14% of the time that it is picked, it is a counter pick. So when I say that, I mean it as in when you pick TF, only 14% of the time is when you would actually see the enemy mid laner. So basically, what that means is that you generally don't really care too much about whoever you're fighting into, at least in pro play, because of what we explained earlier. Why TF's being picked in the first place? You're not really picking it to dominate lane. You're picking it to make sure that your other lanes are getting ahead too. And yeah, generally this plan has also been working out pretty well too because his win rate is 60%, and that's pretty good for a champion that doesn't care about itself and plays for the team as well. Now, comparing that to your solo queue stats, it is only protect 8% of the time, which is it's not the highest pick rate. I think it's probably generally because people want to opt more for the flashier champions. Also has a 1% ban rate too, because the bans are going to understand champions that are, you know, things like Kaisa and whatnot. And also has a 49% win rate, which is actually not bad for a TF. But considering the fact that there's so much potential in his kit, it generally requires either very good team coordination or for the other people on your team to understand the strengths that a Test of Fate can provide and to basically play to like allow the TF to flourish in their comps. So yeah, with that, I'll be handing it over to Emerson to basically explain why we generally wouldn't recommend it for a clash.
Thanks, Tuan. Yeah, so a lot of great points from Tuan earlier, but when it comes to why we would recommend him, if we were to compare pro level play to low elo play, I think that counter picks into TF and low elo are fantastic. I think that the reason why they aren't used a lot in professional play is because those counter picks are even easier for a professional level team to basically deal with them than it would be that the counter pick into TF gets a bigger advantage. But when it comes to low elo, I think it's a lot easier for a Zed, a Yasuo, a Nocturne, these like great counters, Fizz, to basically snowball a game out of control. Whether it's the TF player not being able to wave management and they're getting heavily punished, and then they're getting snowballed on harder because of that, or just in general, like game sets. If the TF player doesn't know enough about the side lanes that he's playing for, and when they hit their power spikes, and when are optimal uses of his destiny, that can be the make or break point of the champion. I think that another section of TF that a lot of people don't really take in consideration when using them in Clash is that even back timing is important, because as a TF player, when you are physically present on the map, you are scary. Like when you have ult up and the opponent's team is like, oh god, like he could come top lane, he could come bot lane, he could come for this jungle skirmish that's happening right now. And when you are backing or recalling as a TF, that is the window in which the opposing team is safe, right? And they can take a more aggressive trade with their lane opponent, or their jungler can invade or do a sneaky drag. And I feel like in low elo, TFs don't know when are good times to back, in order for like when an objective comes, or when their solo lanes or like bot lane is going to reach level 6. I think that by having that knowledge as a player, you become a better TF player. And I don't think that at low elo, this is something that people really keep in mind. Yeah, so all in all, I think that when it comes to low elo, it's just that the players in low elo, TF players, they aren't able to take his macro skill ceiling to its heights that professional players are capable of doing. Because when it comes to the micro side, I fully believe that anyone can play TF when it comes to mechanics. Like he's a very simple champion. It's the, if you want to call it that, it's the brain sense. It's the map knowledge, the game knowledge, that stuff that I feel like low elo players probably don't have yet.
So yeah, with that being said, another champion that we believe should not be picked in Clash despite it being picked regularly in pro play is Syndra. The reason why that Syndra is picked quite frequently in pro play is because she is generally very safe. She is long range. She has very safe wave clear. So it's actually pretty hard to punish a Syndra that is being piloted by a pro player because they fully understand the strength and weakness of Syndra and tries to play to make sure that it covers the weaknesses. And another reason why she is also picked is because she has very good pick potential with her E. And there's actually a hidden mechanic. Well, don't know if it's hidden or if it's a bug or unintentional. But basically, what you can do is you can actually cast your E first before casting your Q. And there's this thing where, as the orb slash ball is being summoned from your Q, it's already been registered from the E that it is going to be knocked away. So you can actually do like a surprise stun, making it very hard for the enemy team to basically react to it. And it's generally like a very good surprise factor that like it's very hard to actually react to it because it's hard to see it coming because basically by the time you see the orb spawning, it's already coming at you. Furthermore, Syndra can also be a flex pick because she can be played in the mid lane and in the ADC. If you go back to, I believe it was season 8, when bot laners were like the thing, Syndra was most of the time being picked because she basically had, the range to contest ADCs when it comes to farming. And also because the burst potential was so high that at the time you can basically combo to kill the ADC. But obviously, fast forwarding to this season, although she might not have that capability anymore, she can still be picked bot lane to counter the ADCs that cannot match her range. So some examples of that would be Kaisa, Vayne, Samira, just a few that Syndra can ap- that can like take advantage of earlier on. Hence why she can possibly be flexed. So yeah, with that, I'll also be going over the stats of Syndra in pro play versus solo queue. In pro play, Syndra has a 16% ban rate. So generally speaking, the bans in pro play are generally being thrown at more towards the OP junglers and or the global presence mid laners. So it sort of leaves Syndra under the radar, and basically you can't really invest a ban to Syndra because if you do, you potentially leave the option to have a meta jungler open or a global mid laner open, which is very strong in the pro play, at least as of 11.13 patch. On top of that, she has a 25% pick rate and a 42% counter pick rate. So this is actually a champion that you'd prefer to see your opposing mid laner first. And we'll be going over a bit later as to why that is the case. So yeah, despite her fairly decent pick rate, she only has an 18% win rate. And it's probably mostly because the times that she's being picked, she basically isn't able to do what she wants to do. Essentially, providing a safe wave clear and pick potential. Because most often than not, she'll most likely be engaged on thanks to the meta picks in other lanes, like support for example. Nautilus is pretty fairly meta. Leona's also fairly meta, and those champions actually do fairly well into Syndra, as we'll be explaining later on why that is the case. So comparing that to solo queue, yeah, her pick rate's only 4%. It's not really the highest. On top of that, her ban rate is only 4%. So it is generally a champion that solo queue doesn't really seem to find threatening. Furthermore, her win rate is only 47%, which is very low for a mid laner. Generally, you want to be playing champions that at least has a 49% win rate or higher, just because you want to be giving to the benefit of the doubt that some champions would require like more mechanics to basically like pilot properly. And yeah, basically her solo queue stats are not really the greatest, and Emerson is going to explain why that is the case.
So the reason why her win rates or stats in solo queue are so bad is just because as a champion she has such a high skill floor and ceiling, especially since they nerfed her Q a while back so that it costs even more mana. It's very punishing when you miss Qs in lane, whether it's for harassment or for farming. And because of this, she isn't really the lane bully that she used to be. Like Syndra used to be picked both in professional play and solo queue because you'd be able to just harass your opponent like crazy. Because when Syndra uses her Q, she's actually allowed to physically move while she's casting it, which is like a benefit to her as a champion. Whereas most champions, you can't really cast spells while moving. Like the ability must come out while you're standing still, and also because she has a very good and easy trade pattern. It's just QE into like W or like QE auto attack, you proc phase rush or electrocute and just walk away. But when it comes to the professional level and comparing it to Clash, I feel like something that professional players are capable of doing, uh, whereas like solo queue or like class players won't be able to do, is deal with her lack of mobility. Like even at the professional level, junglers and supports will just like dual gank Syndra's and then end up killing her. But if you were to relate this back to even just Clash, like not even like having just a jungler or a support ganking, like the fact that Syndra has such low mobility, she's very easily abusable. If we were to take it outside of the laning phase, when she's just in a river, if she ever uses her E as a pick tool or an engage tool, and like let's say it doesn't even hit the target, she is essentially defenseless at this point. She's just a damage bot, so it is very easy to just go for her after she uses her E. And I think that as a low elo player, you may be primarily thinking of your E as a pick tool in order to help your team uh, either engage and pick that champion or to like follow up. But you need to understand that that is also your only get off me tool, and that if you do use this, if someone jumps you or flanks you or goes for you, you don't really have anything to really help yourself. You just gotta hope that you have enough damage to one shot the person that's coming after you, if that's the case. And currently, because there are so many tank supports and like tank top laners for Clash, I don't think that's really the case. If a Malphite ults you, I don't think you're gonna be able to get him off you very easily. And yeah, so in total, I think that uh, in combination with her high skill ceiling and floor, I would not recommend Syndra as a champion to play for Clash. And just to add on, like a side note, is that Syndra can be flexed, but that in itself is something that I feel would be difficult to pull off in Clash, because if you are planning on flexing her, you have to also have an ADC who can play Syndra in the bot lane. And I don't think that's something that low elo players have the skill to be able to flexibly play around.
Yeah, and because this isn't season 8 anymore, it's season 11, ADCs don't really need to learn how to play mages. So generally speaking, especially in lower elo, like that's mostly why we wouldn't recommend picking Syndra. But we've been talking a lot about uh, mid laners that I picked in pro play, but don't recommend it in Clash. And there are champions in other lanes that follow the same suit. So, for example, in the top lane, a champion that is picked fairly common or fairly regularly, rather, but we generally wouldn't recommend in Clash is Gangplank. The reason why Gangplank is seeing a lot in pro play is because he's a very strong side top laner. Generally speaking, the current meta in pro play is to stack Dragon as quickly as possible. And because Dragon is near the bot side of the map, near mid and bot lane, generally all the attention is going to be focused there. So top laners are basically just left on an island, and Gangplank is very good at capitalizing on it because generally that would mean that he wouldn't be receiving a lot of attention. And thanks to his gold generation with his Q, he can actually, if both top laners are farming equally, GPs still get the better of the stick because he's actually getting even more gold from farming as opposed to any other top laner. Another reason why, as well, is because he has good global presence with his ultimate. So, say hypothetically, if a dragon fight did break out, Gangplank would be able to contribute to the team fight first because of his global uh cannon barrage, I think believe it was called. And basically, because it's at an instant, he'll be able to get the first move towards the contributing to the dragon fight, since top laners usually either have to rotate to drag or will have to invest a TP. But even then, that would take time and wouldn't necessarily even make it there, if anything, because there is that possibility that the enemy team just dies at Jag before their top laner even makes it in. So as a GP, it benefits you a lot that you can play weak side, but then also still be able to contribute to early game team fights because of his ultimate. And then let's say hypothetically that they want to attack the top side because they know, hey, it's GP. He's fairly weak early on. We can try to create lead on him. It's actually pretty hard to dive a GP thanks to his W, which heals him and basically acts as a cleanse QSS. He also has, as mentioned earlier, has very good wave clear. So if they try to set up a very big minion wave to attempt to dive, GP can clear it very quickly with his barrels, and if that doesn't clear it, he can also use ultimate to make sure that all the minions that crash wave do die, so it makes pulling it off even harder. Furthermore, he has very good late game scaling. Once you get 2 to 3 items, your barrels start hitting like trucks. Basically, you'll be very good at creating a lot of space and essentially zoning for your team, since the enemy team can't really just, walk into, like, not even have to be on top of your barrels, but near your barrels, because if you're able to, like, chain combo them, like how pro players are capable of doing it, it definitely makes it very hard for the backline to contribute in team fights. Thus, why GP is such a fairly common pick in the top side. So moving forward, regarding the stats of Gangplank, in pro play, he has a 28% ban rate. So generally, teams don't want to be dealing with top laners that can play very safe. Hence, why they opt for the ban. Especially if a team likes to play through top side, they try to make sure that they're banning any top laners that are very good at absorbing the pressure. Hence, why GP is seeing quite a fair amount of bans. With that, he has a 15% pick rate and a 44% counter pick rate. So GP isn't really a champion that you want to be blind picking. There are ways how to punish a GP, as we'll be going over why or how that can be done. In addition, he has a 40% win rate, basically signaling that there is a reason why the GP is more or less picked after the enemy top laner is already been picked, because yeah, there are multiple ways how to deal with a GP, as we would be explaining later on how to do so. So yeah, just comparing that to your Soul Q stats, he has a 1.5% ban rate. uh, People are generally just never going to ban GP, because not only is he, you know, not really that threatening in solo queue, also a fact of, are there even any people that would pick GP? And to that point, he only has a 4% pick rate, so that's also fairly low as well. And then just to add on top of that, he has a 49% win rate. So he does have a fairly decent, win rate in solo queue, but translating that over to Clash, there's fairly a couple of reasons why we wouldn't recommend picking GP. As yeah, Emerson will be going over why that's the case.
Yeah, so I think that GP kind of falls under like an Azir style champion where he is a very strong late game powerhouse, but the problem is that he needs to get there. And I think that when it comes to low elo clash games, that that's something where you have to rely on your team in order to carry the mid and early game. And I feel like when it comes to professional play, that is a bit more viable because professional teams are able to understand kind of like the GP's wants and needs and are able to kind of give him that time and or the resources in order for him to flourish. But when it comes to kind of clash setting, I feel like his ultimate can be very useful in order to help across the map, but as a champion, he still needs that time. And it is very possible in a clash setting that, their mid laner gets fed and kind of takes over the game, or their jungler gets fed and takes over the game, or just like bot lane isn't kind of working out, right? And so because of that, I don't know if GP really is like the best pick for you to have for Clash. If I were to add on another point, when it comes to top laners kind of more or less viewed as like either but fighters, bruisers, or tanks. And if I were to go over that, I feel like GP, because he doesn't have any hard CC, it's a bit harder to pull off when it comes to Clash games and team fights because you are basically there for damage. If you're not at a point where you can provide significant damage, you aren't actually very useful to a team fight. You have very good zone control, but if your barrels aren't critting or your barrels are not able to do a significant amount of damage, then you aren't as useful as, let's say, like a Gnar who can like Gnar people into a wall, or let's say like a Volley Bear who's able to get a good pick with his Q and ulti, or even like a Renekton who can like potentially by himself 100 to 0 their ADC or mid laner and just walk out like nothing happened because he has Gore Drinker and his ultis popped and everything. So I feel like if you aren't already at that breaking point for GP, you really don't provide as much as like some of these other champions that, relatively speaking, could be piloted a lot easier than GP himself. And then the last aspect for GP, I would say, is that as a champion, is very mana hungry. I feel like low elo players may take his Q for granted and try to last hit a lot in the early game with Q. And the amount of money that Q gives you just on like the single minion, to be honest, I don't think is worth the amount of mana that you'll actually be using in that way. And I feel like mana management on GP is very important because your orange, your essentially your get out of jail free card, is very expensive as a spell. And if you just kind of keep spamming your Q all over the place, you won't have your get out of jail free card. So I think that correct mana management is something that professional players can definitely do, but when it comes to low elo players, it's probably not really pulled off as well. And because of these reasons, yeah, this is why we don't think that GP really is the best pick for Clash or low elo Clash. We think that there are definitely a lot of other more team fight impactful and potentially even early game champions that you can pick.
So just to put a small disclaimer, if you are someone that does play a fair amount of set champions earlier, so the TF, the Syndra, the Gangplank, we aren't trying to discourage you from playing it. If anything, if you do have the team coordination, you can go for it because if your team is able to communicate or understand like the strengths and weaknesses of these champions, then it should allow you to flourish with them. But if you're just, a regular league player and you see these champions picked in pro play, you're like, oh wow, I want to pick this and try to practice it for our upcoming Clash games, we would probably advise against it if you're looking to like replicate the same success that pro play uh use these champions, as we believe that they generally require a lot more um, practice, whether it's through mechanically or game knowledge, macro sense. And yeah, with that being said, we're gonna head over to our Clash meta report.
So today for our Clash Meta report, our first pick is Seraphine. Seraphine, we think, is a great pick for Clash. One, because of her ability as a flex pick. She can actually be triple flexed, potentially even quadriflexed in some instances, but the main three positions we think that she can be flexed into are mid lane, support, and even potentially as an ADC, or not as a built as an ADC, but like an ability power carry. We think that as a champion, she just provides so much utility to the team that, yeah, her being in any one of those three roles is just a benefit no matter what. And another point, obviously, as we always state, is that she's very easy to learn. Her skill floor is so low, and even her skill ceiling isn't that high either. So whether you're just picking her up, or you've dropped 20 games on her, or you're a Seraphine one trick, she's still very easy to play. And yeah, if you've mastered her, that's even better. And speaking about her utility and her benefits to her team, I'm gonna give it to Tuan to talk about her incredibly strong ult.
Yeah. So as Emerson mentioned earlier, his ulti is just like I think outright broken at the moment. Her ability to extend her ult range from not just hitting enemies to hitting allies, I think is super powerful. It's essentially like a Sona ultimate, but just longer range. And the fact that you basically don't have to be like in front of them either to land the ultimate. What you can do as a Seraphine is you can stand right beside your ADC or your mid laner, use them to extend the range of the ultimate, and then hopefully it will connect to your front line, which then again extend its range, which then hit the enemy front line, which then extends range once more. And if it hits the enemy back line, then that's just like game changing right there because you essentially just CC the entire team. And it's very powerful in jungle too because there's narrow choke points. There's not much room that you can sort of move around. So the odds of hitting like 3-man, 4-man Seraphine ultis just increases so much more from there, which is why I think like Seraphine is just at the moment of 1.3 just very OP. If you haven't played her yet, pick it up. As Amsa mentioned earlier, it's arguably a fairly easy champion to pick up, and her ability to like change the outcome of team fights just so damn high. So another champion that we also think is very good to pick up for your clash is Udyr. I think Udyr at the moment he's just super broken, so strong at the moment. He can clear all 6 camps in jungle and be able to hit Scarlet Crab by 315, which is very, very, very good for jungle at the moment because the amount of XP you get per camp is so good. And generally, you'll be hitting level 4 as a jungler before your laners even hit level 3, which I think is absurd. It's like that whole idea as a jungler, you're actually getting even more EXP than your laners by 3 minutes. And his ganks are fairly easy to pull off. Just run at someone, you bear slap them. If they have mobility, that's fine because thanks to Udyr's movement speed, you could catch up to them fairly easily. So it's really hard to avoid the bear slap. And also on top of that, his ability to take neutral objectives very early on is very scary too. He has very fast and healthy ways to take down the Jang with her early on. So just as long as your team has the priority and the vision setup prepped beforehand, it should be fairly easy to just sneak an early drag or sneak that early Rift Herald for your team. With that being said, another champion that we think is very strong at the moment is Shen. I think personally that Shen is a very safe laner. It's fairly hard to get a good matchup against him because he's such a like that stable rock top laner, and his ultimate is very game changing as well, in my opinion. I think especially since that a lot of the times Clash teams tend to pick champions that have great skirmish or assassinating potential that a Shen ultimate can just like shut it down. So yeah, Emerson, would you say that like Shen is a good like counterpick to the assassins slash skirmishers that Clash teams usually draft a lot.
Definitely, Tuan. I think that Shen Ultimate can be the game changer between like a 2v2 in the jungle mid lane, and it can be the reason why it ends up going in your favor when normally it wouldn't. If you're a mid laner and you're a mage and you're fighting against an assassin, it's more or less already in the assassin's favor in the early game, and if you and your jungler are fighting over scuttle priority against the assassin mid laner and the enemy jungler, realistically you'll get bursted very early, or your jungler will get bursted very early, and a Shen ult can be the difference between losing your jungler or dying yourself and losing the scuttle and then into a future objective, or completely turning it around and killing both the jungler and mid laner and being able to get the neutral objective that you guys are fighting over. I think that his ability to have presence in all the lanes via his shielding capability is so strong. Not even purely in a mid lane perspective, even in a bot lane perspective, where it is always a constant 2v2 between the supports and ADCs. His just ability to be there and deny or even aggressively help initiate is way too beneficial and very easy to pull off in a low elo Clash team. Speaking of denying, when it comes to assassins, our next pick and our last pick is Malzahar. We think that Malzahar is a great pick for low elo Clash play because of his safe laning. It's very, very easy to lane as Malzahar after you get Lost Chapter, even potentially if you buy an early tier, because yeah, you just E the wave, the aids, the space aids will kind of just spread across each of the minion, and in addition, when you kill a minion with the ability, it actually gives you back a portion of your mana, which for some people would be way beneficial if they're not like the best at last hitting or they're using their resources all willy-nilly all the time. His W helps push the wave more when the E is on minions, and his Q is a very easy way to just kind of like one-shot the backline casters once you have enough AP. But the main reason why we want to play Malzahar is because of his ability to deny using his ultimate, the Nether Grasp. His ultimate is one, point and click, so you can't really miss it, and two, it is such a hard denial, and it kind of forces the opponent to either respect it, or if they don't respect it, they just kind of get punished, right? And in the sense that if they respect it, whether it's by not initiating some things that normally would be beneficial to them, or forcing them to purchase a QSS, is always beneficial for your side of the team. Because an example would be, if they have a very strong assassin type character on their team, whether it's maybe Kha'Zix in the jungle or it's an Akali in the mid lane, both of those champions' goal is to jump into the back line and to blow up someone very quickly. By just being Malzahar and sitting near your carries or just yourself existing, you are capable of completely denying what they want to do, and whether they attempt to do it anyways and you ult them, suppress them, and your team just focuses down that person, or you ult them and they were forced to purchase QSS, which delays their damage items. Maybe they don't even have enough burst to actually damage or to blow up the target anymore because they had to waste money on the QSS. In both instances, it is really good for your team. And yeah, just as an added note, the fact that Malzahar gets his own personal spell shield, I think, is great for low elo when it comes to forms of engage that come from low elo Clash players, whether it's a Blitzcrank hook, a Thresh hook, maybe it's like an Udyr Bear Slap. Just by existing and having your passive, you are capable of protecting yourself, and sometimes it's even by accident. So I think that's great for someone who maybe isn't the best at mid lane, but you can play something that denies the enemy team of what they want to do. Yeah, that's our last pick for our Clash Meta Report. I'd like to thank you guys for joining us. This has been the Clash in a Flash podcast. I'm your host, Emerson.
And I'm your co-host, Tuan.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.